Welcome to Wicked Housewives on Cape Cod, Living the Dream, a show that celebrates ordinary people who do extraordinary things. Hear what motivated them to attain their goals, see which circumstances molded their character and turned them into everyday heroes. Learn more about this show and the hosts for Wicked Housewives on Cape Cod TV and radio on Facebook. Now here are your hosts, the Wicked Housewives on Cape Cod, Kathleen O'Keefe Cannabis and Lori Boyle.
Welcome to Wicked Housewives on Cape Cod. My name is Lori Boyle, and the other Wicked Housewife on Cape Cod is Kat Cannabis at the other end of the table. And we have a really spectacular show for you today. We have General Gordon Sullivan, who is the retired Army Chief of Staff, who we have captured and roped in here, and we're going to interview him today, and he's a wonderful man, and we're just very excited to have him.
Give us, if you would please, a thumbnail sketch of your Army career, because it is incredible.
Okay, well, I'll start at the beginning. I was born in 1937 in Boston. I grew up in Quincy, spent my entire youth in Quincy. I was commissioned in 1959 from Norwich University up in Vermont as an armor officer. Tanks, cavalry, and mechanized infantry, that sort of stuff. I went in the Army on active duty in June of in November of 59, and retired in July of 1995. I had 36 years of service. Spent a year plus in Korea. Went to Vietnam 2 times. Germany for 12 and a half years. Commanded at almost every level from platoon, smallest unit actually, up to division. Was promoted to general officer in November of 1993, and in the latter part of my career I went to the Pentagon as a lieutenant general and retired as the senior most officer in the United States Army, as the Chief of Staff of the Army and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I am proud to say that I am and was an American soldier. And I am proud of all the men and women who probably made me look better than I really am over that 36 years. And it's to them that I owe what I am today. So anyway, that's what I did. And
No, you also wrote a book.
I did.
You wrote a book, may I?
Sure.
The book is called Hope is Not a Method. And the book really talks about some of the decisions that the general had to make, and it compares and contrasts those with decisions that people in business make all the time. It's such a great book. It was so interesting. Mm-hmm. I just wonder what prompted you to write it?
Well, I was the chief from 1991 until 1995, and that, as many of you listeners would know, 1991, the first Gulf War was over, and as is usual in America, the American people demanded a peace dividend because the Cold War was over in 89 and 90, and then the Gulf War was over. So let's have a peace dividend. So all of a sudden the Army starts getting smaller in a hurry. And I wanted not only the soldiers to know, but as many American people as possible to know how we did what we did. That is, take about 1/3 of the people who were in the Army in 1991 out by 95 We went from 1.5 million soldiers in the active Army, the Army Guard, and the Army Reserve down to just about 1 million. So we essentially dropped, released in one form or another, either retirement or resignation or whatever. Very few forced outs, but some people were forced out, although they were paid for their service. And I wanted the American people to know what we did and how we did it, and compared it to some of the work that large corporations do or do not do, whatever the case may have been. There are good and bad examples of this kind of stuff. And that's what the book is all about. And the title is Hope is Not a Method. In other words, if you hope good things are going to happen, and I don't care whether it's in your life or at your work or whatever, if all you're doing is hoping that good stuff is going to happen or bad stuff not happen, you got to take a grip. You got to get a grip on things, because hoping is not enough. You have to make things happen, and that's actually the message of the book. Mm-hmm. You have to get up, get your skinny little body up out of bed in the morning and make stuff happen. And I found out the day that I became the chief. Actually, my predecessor said to me the day before, I was sitting at that side of his desk, he said, it's different on this side of this desk. You're going to see that tomorrow. And it was. Over 1.5 million people were looking at me to see what I was going to do to make their life easier or whatever. And okay, so we had to get on with it, and we did. And that's what this book is about.
You know, what I found really interesting about your book when I was reading it, it was, you know, about Berlin, Germany, and I was in Berlin when the wall went up. I was a first grader, and we were fighting a Cold War at that time. And then the wall came down, which was great celebration. But I think we talked about this once before. Do you think we're going back into a Cold War?
Well, I don't know whether it's a Cold War or not, but certainly the Russians have come back, and General Mark Milley, who's now the Chief of Staff, Massachusetts boy, I might note, his testimony, his first testimony, he said that the most serious existential threat to the United States of America is Russia. Mm-hmm. And those are sobering words, and I suspect he's right. And the Russian army that we now see in Ukraine and Crimea is much different than the Russian army I saw when my late wife and I went across Russia as a guest of the Russian government in 1993.
How is it different?
Oh, it's much better. This is a world-class army. We can't kid ourselves. These guys demonstrated it in Crimea. You only had to look at the TV when they went in there for 3 minutes to know that this army is much different. And serious.
Well, it really points to the it's necessary for us to keep an army that is ready to fight at any moment. They have to be trained and ready to go.
Well, that's right. And I think all of the services do, but in true fashion, we have a tendency to, and it began actually in the American Revolution, after the American Revolution, we have a world-class army, which we demonstrated in the first Gulf War, and then we took it apart. We had a world-class army in World War II, probably the best in the world, and well, it was the best in the world. And then in Korea, we had, frankly, destroyed that army, and we found ourselves getting kicked all over the lot in Korea by a country that wasn't even a country when World War II ended. So All right, so what? Well, so we made plans to ensure that we didn't repeat some of those mistakes, which went all the way back to the 1700s. And the object of the exercise was to maintain the essential nature of the Army, which is based on, obviously, soldiers trained to fight, trained to do whatever we asked them to do, and developed as leaders. And because we had a volunteer army, we went after all high school graduates, many, obviously most of the, in fact, all of the commissioned officers are college graduates. And many of the non-commissioned officers have some college. Many of them have associate degrees, as well as we actually have some with PhDs, which is probably counterintuitive, but we do. They like it, and they feel satisfied, whatever their degree might be. And modern equipment, get the best equipment we can buy, that money will buy, or at least the money that we have now, and then have a doctrine that enables us to fight and provides the framework, intellectual framework upon which we would design units and so forth and so on. And it's made up, as I said earlier, active guard and reserve and civilians. When you add the civilians, the size of the Army is about 1,020,000, maybe 200,000 when you throw everybody in. It's 1,200,000, but the uniform side of the house is about 1 million. Okay, so anyway, the object of the exercise is to keep it all pulled together when you're releasing 500,000 people. Now, if the Wall Street Journal were to really write that number, people would gasp. 500,000 people, we released that number and held the institution together. That's what we wanted people to understand, how we did it. And we did it with training. We kept training. We'd release people, and we would keep the units training so that we kept their edge, and we kept what we retained trained and ready. And frankly, I was asked one day after I gave a briefing on that subject, its major said to me, "Sir, we hear you talking about change. What aren't you going to change?" And I said I was going to do my very best to maintain the essence of the Army. And then I went over to the Army's battle flag, which has about, let's say, a little less than 200 battle streamers, beginning with Lexington and ending at that time with Somalia, I think. Mogadishu, actually. You know, I held them in my hand and I said, the essence of the Army is found in these battle streamers, because it was men and women in the uniform of the United States of America who went out since 1775 to protect and defend the tenets of the United States of America. And by the way, those of you who are doing your math know that 1775 is before there was the United States of America and before there was a Constitution. So you can't think of the United States of America and not think of the U.S. Army and the other services. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say Army, I'm only one piece of the action. Remember, I told you I was also a member of the Joint Chiefs. So I'm very well aware, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and in times of war, the Coast Guard make up the units of armed services. And during World War II, the Merchant Marines were there also. And other auxiliary units. But at any rate, keep them trained and ready.
That sounds like a really good motto right there. You know, let's talk about something that you mentioned once before, being in the business of not losing versus being in the business of winning. It almost sounds like, you know, not settling for good enough versus settling for being the best.
Yeah, second best don't win anything. Second best people. My English teacher probably would have had a heart attack with that sentence.
You illustrate that in your book, though, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, as most of you know, those of you who have read a little bit about anything about the Civil War know that until General Grant was appointed as the commanding general of the whole Army, we were sort of piecemealing things. Grant appears on the scene. President Lincoln brings General Grant from out west and tells him, okay, get this war over with. I'm tired of this. We have to destroy the Confederacy and make it so painful that they won't continue this war. So General Grant, in really short order, puts together a plan that has 5 different generals moving in the same general direction. That is, to destroy the will and the capability of the Confederacy to continue that war. He had General Meade attacking south from Washington, D.C. towards Richmond, and his mission was to destroy Robert E. Lee's army, which he did. He had General Butler coming up from Hampton Roads. That was sort of, it was ultimately successful, not particularly efficient, but it worked. General Sherman went down to Atlanta from north of Atlanta. He went down, I guess it would be around Huntsville, Alabama, and then he went down to Atlanta and then out to Savannah and back up ultimately to Washington, D.C. to march in the Victory Parade. And General, he had a cavalryman out in the Shenandoah Valley and took care of the Confederates out there. Everybody was moving at once. Everybody was moving at once. He was doing it from horseback, believe it or not, with a pencil. And he came to win, and he did. And everybody knew it. Now, you know, there's a lot more to be said about it, but the point is that he overwhelmed the Confederacy, and the war stopped. Now, there's more to the story. It goes on. There's all kinds of other stuff that had to go on, but some of it is still bothering the country today. Okay, so anyway, we came to win. And we went to win in the first Gulf War, and we went to win in Panama, took 27 objectives from midnight until daylight. Same night, 27 objectives. Special Forces, Rangers, paratroopers, ground troops, all orchestrated with the Air Force, and some stuff from the sea. The SEALs were involved, and some Navy and the Marines. Everybody was involved, and it went like clockwork. It can happen, and it did. Anyway, we came to win. And we came to win, too, in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm not going to talk much about that. I wasn't I had retired before any of that happened. I mean, I know about as much about it as you do, the listening audience, so I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
Okay. Well, that's not the first time you've looked to history.
No.
You're very interested in history, and you know an awful lot about all military history. And in many parts of the book, I noticed that when you were wrestling with some kind of a decision, you had your friend, the historian, look to see if there was some kind of situation beforehand where military men had made a decision similar to the one that you had to make. Why did you do that?
I was interested in how people in my position thought. What was their thought pattern? What kind of questions did they ask? Now, there are plenty of well-educated people in this listening audience who know that history really doesn't repeat itself, and I'm very well aware of that. The contexts are different. There's any number of things that are different, but when you get right down to the individual wrestling with a problem, how did he or she marshal whatever information they needed, and what were they worried about, and how did they overcome obstacles? One of my problems was that in the first Gulf War, we began to see the promise and the difficulty associated with technology. Digits were coming in, global positioning systems. We had actually, the troops actually bought things in sporting goods stores that they would use for direction, and put way stations in, and they could buy stuff in stores that was better than what we had in the military. Although the government invented the global positioning systems and all of that, but we hadn't issued them yet. Okay, so we had to marshal money to buy that kind of equipment. Digital communications, processing equipment, night vision goggles, you name it. And some of those were so powerful that it changed the way we did business. For the former artilleryman in the audience, the Army standard for putting indirect fire on a distant target is to do it from the time the target is observed until you put effective fire on it is 8 minutes. Well, using lasers, laser designators for range, processing equipment, you can move everything to the guns. You could do it without a man in the loop, but we don't. We have a man in the loop, and the standard is now 3 minutes. You do it in 3 minutes. Well, that changes the dynamics on the battlefield, you can be sure of that. But it also means that you use fewer people to drive trucks and move ammunition around because you use less ammunition. Okay, so if you use less ammunition, that means you need fewer plants, ammunition plants and so forth and so on, ships to carry the ammunition. And there's a lot of things that happen. And as a result of that, and we can move manpower around, in theory. Unfortunately, the money people didn't let you do it because they took if they knew you were saving manpower, then they took the money that paid them. So you couldn't pay them, so you got smaller. It was sort of like a spiral. I know this is very complicated, but it's the kind of stuff that we had to wrestle with. And by the way, I would say that after 4 years, the Army was still trained and ready. And you saw that Army in the Balkans. You saw it during the time I was the chief in Mogadishu, Rwanda, Haiti. Back in Iraq, we were doing some resettling of the Kurds, which is still going on, by the way. Some of these things never end. And we're still in the Philippines fighting the same extremists that the U.S. Army was fighting back at the turn from the 1800s to the 1900s, believe it or not. The same movement. Okay, so we were doing all of that and getting smaller all at the same time. And we didn't let you down either.
No, you certainly didn't. And that is a lot of responsibility that you had. I'm sure it kept you up many nights wrestling with decisions that you had to make.
I'd do it again.
I'm sure
In a
you
heartbeat,
would.
I'm sure. So your book is actually a national bestseller. And what I found so fascinating about your book, although it is Hope is Not a Method, and you are, you know, the 4-star general, your book is what business leaders can learn from the American Army. That's really what this book is all about, despite the fact that it has a lot of information dealing with the military in it. So if there was one message that you could leave our audience with today concerning this book that is something a businessman, a businesswoman, someone who is looking at a career outside of the military now, what is the one message that you could leave them with?
It's all about people. It's all about people. It's about the development of your people. It's about treating them with dignity and respect, listening to them, being there when they are in a crisis mode. It isn't just issuing some abstract order. This is what I want you to do, boom, 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 and by the way, you'll never see me again. You do it. Believe me, your presence, the presence of the senior leader at the head of the table when decisions are being made, critical decisions are being made and discussions are being held, and when the troops are out there trying to open a new market in a place that has never been a marketplace, if the leader is present for duty, not all the time, but periodically, and articulating very clearly their expectations, and he or she is present, it counts. And don't sublimate the presence of the leader on the outcome. I'll tell you a story.
Oh, we love stories. Okay.
There was a crisis in Rwanda, as you probably know, a genocide, horrible. It was horrible. And I happened to be in the Middle East and when it was going on, and we sent troops. And so I figured I'd stop in Rwanda on my way back from some other garden spot where I was. And I went into an airfield, a big airport, and got into a C-130, which is a smaller aircraft, and flew into Rwanda. The capital of Rwanda is Kigali, and on Lake Victoria, or off of it, just off of it. And the streams were full of dead bodies and so forth and so on. So I went down and talked to some people in the State Department and some of the Army people, and I was asked to talk to the troops. So I talked to some troops that were under a tarp because it was really hot. And so we sat there and talked about some things, and after it was over, a soldier came up and asked me to sign this little bush hat that he had in his hands. He said, "Would you sign your name?" And I said, I always thought that was sort of strange that they would want me to do that. But anyway, they did, so I signed it. And I asked him, I said, why do you want me to do this? And he said, well, it's not for me, it's for my buddy. I said, yeah, where's he? Is he asleep over under the trees? And he said, no, sir, he's not. He's back at Fort Bliss. And then he said, he told me I'd see you. Remember I told you I was somewhere else? I didn't think many people, other than those who had reason to know that I was in Kigali, knew I was actually there. But that soldier's friend told him he would see me. That was the tip. I knew it anyway, but it came home to me very loud and clear.
That's how important your presence was.
That I don't know whether it was me personally, but it was the presence of the senior leader where they were made a difference.
A big difference.
A huge difference. There were 18 and 19-year-old men and women pulling cadavers out of a lake, so that we could put the hoses, the suction hoses from a water purification unit into the water to make it fresh, clean water, and that's what stopped the dying, other than stopping the people getting hacked up with machetes and stuff. They had plenty of food. What they didn't have was clean water.
Shows you how important water is. Again, hope is not a method. Available in bookstores throughout the country, on Amazon. Get it. An incredible book. If you are a business owner, this is the type of book you need to read. I want to thank you so much, General Gordon Sullivan, for being on this show with us today. Lori and I have had a great time with your stories, with your information. It's been just absolutely amazing. Thank you so very, very much.
Thanks a lot. It's nice to live on the Cape 2 or 3 months out of the year. I grew up in Quincy and love to come down here, and it's good for my soul. And by the way, sitting between two women here is pretty nice too. It's great.
Thank you for joining Lori Boyle and Kathleen "Kat" O'Keefe Cannabis on Wicked Housewives on Cape Cod. Don't forget to like us on Facebook for our show updates, and join us next time when we showcase more everyday heroes.